We are into the home stretch. If you're in this room for track A, you'll see that the title is Negotiations, Negotiations, Negotiations. So there's no prizes for really guessing what we're going to be talking about the next couple of sessions. We want to keep it easy because we know it's the second day and it's the last couple of sessions. Also, we're having a fireside chat, and I know what you're thinking, how can you have a conference without a fireside chat? So here it is. I don't know how you can have a fireside chat in Singapore. That seems a bit painful, but that's what we're going to do. And more will be explained by Tracy Yeh, who's a VP for procurement. I expect quite a few of you will know Tracy from Pico Trading. And I'm looking forward to this one in terms of like how we can get better at negotiation. So Tracy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I think negotiation is something that we do every day, so I don't need to emphasize how important that is. And then in the past 2 years, at least for most of you, I've run into a severe supply chain disruption. And then the demand usually is far higher than supply. So how are you going to negotiate is really the key. Yeah? Sometimes some vendors, some items due to scarcity, actually you need your vendor more than your vendor needs you. Okay? So today what we're going to get together here to help you to be more successful and then to kind of prepare you in case you run into any other disruption. How are you going to negotiate better for your organization? So today we have 3 panelists to share with us their experience in the past 2 years, what kind of major negotiations that they have done, and then what are the lessons learned to share with every one of you. So we all need some time to hone our skill of negotiation, maybe starting from your kids at home, and then you try it in the office. Okay, so today the first panelist I'm going to introduce to all of you is Ms. Kai-Ling Pugh. Okay, she's the CPO of DBS Bank. And second one is Ms. Velda Zen Tolentino. She's the Director, Head of Global Indirect Sourcing, Supply Chain of Masion Solar Technologies. Okay, and then we have one panelist who is going to join us online. Hi, Anga. Anga Miraj, Miraj Gave. Okay, I practiced that whole night. Okay.
Hi, good evening, all in there.
And then he's the head of procurement of Inta Pharma. Anga, thank you for joining us. Okay, ladies, we sit down. Okay. Now, we're going to start as what I have opened at the minute ago. Like in the past 2 years, up and down, all kinds of hiccups that you're facing. Can you share with us like any of the important negotiations that you have done? And if you have done, what kind of a negotiation plan that you have prepared for this very important moment to deal with the vendor, and then what was the planning process? So we start from Kai-Ling.
Okay, sure. So as a bank, especially as a headquartered in Singapore, we are considered providing essential services to the nation as well as also in the countries that we are present in. So we not only have a responsibility towards our employees, we also have a responsibility to our frontliners as well as the citizens that bank with us. So during the pandemic, we sourced for critical essential items such as masks, sanitizers, as well as also those IT virtual networking too. So I think that time the suppliers' relationship are being put to the test, and we often have to struggle for the demand against the healthcare sector, because priority are always given to the medical practitioners, the hospitals. So then it really tests on the procurement's resourcefulness, like we no longer can rely on the catalog vendors to supply us with the masks. We have to really go all out to the global suppliers. So for example, we used to rely on our first aid kits from the pharmacies in Singapore, but they could no longer support that. And we sourced as far as Peru to look for the sources. And we were fortunate enough to find a local manufacturer in India who we never heard of. It's really like going back to the basics, the green book, the yellow pages, and we were really fortunate to source for that mask provider. And I think during the crisis, everybody just came together. Everybody just assumed the role that they think they want to do. And our India colleagues immediately jumped on the next train to the city in India to look at the premises, do the certification, check with the doctors. So I think that is the time where procurement really stand together in time of a tough negotiation situation. Then the other part is also about how do we manage our demand, because everybody is fighting for the same volume of quantity and the products. So then we can't be selfish and we can't be like stockpiling all the masks for our own use. So we really have to be quite precise with what we need, our forecast for the next 3 months, and take into consideration the delivery, the limited flights available, the possibility of flights being cancelled. So all the procurement basics are really being tested from end to end.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So your supplier relationship is put on test. That's the moment of truth, right? And then secondly, you also remember the social responsibilities, that you don't stop piling, and then other people might need some too. Okay, Velda, how about you?
So my example is probably a little bit different. So not in my current role, but during COVID, I spent a long time actually working as both, I guess, procurement and as well as running corporate real estate from a strategy and execution perspective for my previous company, which was a global miner. And during that time, we obviously had to negotiate with our outsourced partner, who obviously we relied on quite a lot of aspects, so health and safety response, procurement of a lot of the supplies, as was mentioned, around PPE and things like that. Also, I guess configuring how we shut down buildings and how we reopen them. And if you recall, COVID actually happened at quite a differential rate, and having a global scope meant we were able to actually be able to learn a lot and also negotiate a lot with our vendor partner to actually take some of those learnings and actually work them through. And if you recollect, you know, the initial impact was the biggest, obviously, in Asia. So playing that back through to North America, to EMEA, so that was one of the kind of, I guess, ongoing negotiations that we had to actually work through as part of that time. So the scope really included things, as I mentioned, HSE, operations, facilities management, and the procurement of goods. So from that perspective, we were actually quite heavily reliant on the partner. And as many of you know, even in services, not all the scope is clearly prescribed. So a lot of what we were doing is obviously jointly collaborating to get some outcomes-based resolutions to a lot of these things which were happening just in time. And so, yeah, so it was a very interesting time, and a lot of this stuff was obviously also remote. So I guess in that way it was also, doubly challenging.
Yeah, thank you, Velda. So your supplier during this critical moment are your best friends.
Yeah, either your best friend or also like, it's kind of like a the single throat to choke, I think it's quite negative, like in many instances when we say that. Hopefully it's also one pat on the back and a collaborative team effort as well. So, but we're very much, I guess, from that perspective, very reliant on the supplier and kind of join at the hip. I noticed there are some attendees from JLL and CBRE, don't know if they're in the room, but it'd be good to exchange as well, because I'm sure that they've got some similar war stories.
Yeah, so how you treat your vendors is all those are the graces that you accumulated and then to use up in a critical moment. So Anga, how about you in the beautiful city of Gujarat?
Hi everybody, good evening there. Nice to see you, nice to meet you virtually.
Yes.
I think the negotiation during COVID time are the supply critical negotiation. I agree with both Key and Walda that here during these times the partnership is more important than working like a vendor or a supplier. And we need to start early, we need to assess our priorities, evaluate our demand and ensure that we give advanced forecast to the suppliers about our consumption plan, firm up our orders and need to negotiate the prices as well, because at times you tend to get carried away by increased demand and lower supply and you may end up paying higher. But even if you are paying higher, you need to assess all the options and take a call on the prices. Here the price part is secondary and the delivery part is very important according to me. And as you are grabbing your materials or getting the materials delivered, mainly the PPEs and other materials which are of short supply, you need to ensure that you are building enough credible alternates so that you can come out of the problem in a very short term, in a very short time. Of course, the supply relationship is very important, and you may agree for certain short-term as well as long-term contracts and ensure that your supply chain is not disturbed because of these disruptions. This was a great learning period for us, for all of us.
Thank you, Anga. Okay, so in terms of the critical success factors in those critical moments when you're negotiating with your vendors that you really need some extraordinary support, what do you think you can share with us? What things really help you in terms of making the negotiations successful? So we start from Valda.
Yeah, sure. So I can share maybe 3 critical success factors on reflection. So the first one I have is really articulating a clear end goal and a clear outcome, and get alignment very early with your supplier partner, and then confirm ways of how to work together. The reason I say that is with kind of the example I gave, a lot of the context was moving very fast, obviously our own context as well as the external COVID context. So what we found was we had to agree quite quickly how often we'll get together so we can share new information, because that was changing all the time. What was the response? We built together a plan and how we execute that and really keep, I guess, channels of communication open. So it was really more of an ongoing negotiations rather than perhaps more of a traditional way of working, whereas, I give you a scope and then you come back. I mean, that's really not going to work in this kind of context. So that was number 1 for us. I would also suggest communicate, both upwards and downwards, because we were heavily reliant on boots on ground. So I was based in Singapore, but I needed to be heavily reliant on people telling me what's happening in North America, in Australia. So both the upwards and downward communication is really important, because that needed to be relied on for a number of different decision making. So I would certainly encourage that. It seems a bit strange, but sometimes I think suppliers need encouraging to be able to actually speak to you in a way that I would say is humanistic, not just kind of a bit of a master-servant type of, I would say, dynamic. So I certainly encourage that. And that probably brings me to the be available and be humanistic. So I think particularly with COVID, everyone has some sort of an impact differentially. and be it, very personal, or be it, through extended relations. So I think particularly at that point in time was really important to show that side. Particularly in the FM space, a lot of our partners were going into buildings where, none of our guys were going in. So they're putting themselves kind of really on the front line at the highest risk. So I think those kind of services really needed to be appreciated and commended. Cleaners, for example, I think through this, we've obviously recognized and appreciate cleaners are really kind of key, right? So I would encourage that. And as I mentioned, establish a clear plan, move with agility and pace. The third one I would also suggest is also do your own homework. So what I found was our supplier was very concentrated in Australia. Australia wasn't really hit with COVID till much later, as some of you may know. So I really had to actually give them a bit of a shot up to actually tell them this is happening and it's going to come, right? So, and also be able to get ahead of the game, to be able to then really pull information and get them to respond in a lot more rapid way. And actually to that end, I actually educated myself with a lot of the webcasts from CBRE, JOL, and a few others. So I would encourage in our kind of own research, be curious and be open to do your own research, particularly in an area where it's fast evolving, so that you are informed with what's happening.
That's quite helpful in terms of having a clear plan and then making very solid and clear communications, and also a little bit of empathy will help, because your supplier are really doing you a big support, giving you a big support. So Kylene, how about you in terms of what you think?
Okay, so maybe before I talk about the success factors that matter to us, maybe I just want to differentiate between bargaining and negotiation. Because a lot of practitioners, they may think that, oh, I'm very good in negotiation, but actually I've sat through a lot of meetings and I hear my own guys negotiating. It's really like shooting the dark. So it really back to Velda's point, how much homework he or she has done. Does he done the benchmark? Does he know who are the different price points? What are the options, your best and worst case situation? And also, what is your end game? Are you trying to get a best commercial deal? Are you trying to manage risk? Are you trying to secure a certain demand? Or are you trying to have the speed to market? So all these preparations are very important. And also, otherwise you won't know, are you setting a bad precedent? Because once you are on a bad precedent, you can never go back to what deal you have. And I think it will just erode all your savings and your credentials. So I think getting your homework done is very important. And then also be very nimble in your strategy. So yesterday we heard about digital negotiation, which I have a very different view. Negotiation really will be successful if you know how to pivot and also have your strategy already. And you must be on your toes, because we are dealing with a human. We are not like what I told someone buying vegetable in the market, that you can use an algorithm to predict what the next guy will respond back. Yeah. So prepare your strategies, know what you're willing to trade, what is your best case and worst case. And then also, when you are preparing your negotiation strategy, have a list of items that you want to trade, and also the list that is on the wish list. That means good to have. So then you play around with all your levers. I think that will help in ensuring you make a good negotiation and you have an outcome, and you won't regret, even if you don't get a good deal. At least you've done your best, you've done your homework.
Yeah, and important. I strongly agree with you about that slide. I know what you're talking about. I went through that class. It's not helpful. Okay, so in Asia, we're so diverse. We have so many countries. So unavoidably, we need to negotiate globally, crossing border, people with different backgrounds, social custom. So what are the lessons learned? We want to listen from Anga. Anga, what do you think? Crossing border global negotiation, what are your lessons learned?
I think cross-border global negotiations are more about understanding different cultures. There are vast differences in several cultures of different countries. We need to overcome certain preconceptions if there are any. People from different regions are discussing together and they have to come to a common agreement. So it is very important in cross-border negotiation to understand and convey our expectations, understand the expectations from both the sides. We need to do your homework about our suppliers culture, and you can learn that a lot by discussing with different people or your colleagues or peer groups, and have conversation about those who are from that particular country or culture. The another point is we need to be find out the ways and means to bridge the cultural gaps. For example, there could be a different laws of the land, so we need to ensure that we are managing the laws of the land and ensuring the compliance while doing the negotiation. There could be a different law of particular import in India, as well as there could be a different law of exporting that particular form of the material from the other Asian or other global country, right? So these kind of gaps, we need to find out the ways and means to bridge these gaps, and we have to plan our approach in a such a way that we minimize any negative impact of any of these cultural differences to maximize our success in the negotiations. This is what is my takeaway from the cross border negotiations.
Thank you, Anga. So we need to do our homework, and then we need to spend the time to understand different cultures, social customs, and know your suppliers, and then know your strength, and know where is your leverage, and then prepare yourself. But the underlying thing is you're dealing with a human being, so we need to be having that extra empathy, like what Velda was sharing with us. So now,
Absolutely.
so now in terms of negotiation, sometime I'm curious. Now I'm talking about ethics in negotiation, and then somehow you realize that the other party is using deception in his or her negotiation with you. How are you going to deal with it? So curious to hear from you, Velda. What's your strategy in terms of you spot something is not quite right? Could be a deception in the making.
I think I got the tough question. It wasn't like everyone to put their hand up for this one, but I was away, so I got this one. I'll share, and I'm sure you guys all have a lot of experience. We've got a lot of collective brains in this room. So firstly, I would say is really to review the situation on both sides. I think malicious or intentional deception are quite strong words, right? So really before acting, I would encourage that we review basically the whole situation. And this can be a number of things. It could be your process. It could be the players involved. It could be the mindsets and the behaviors, because ultimately there are two sides to every story, right? And in particular, I would want to make sure that we do our own due diligence first on our side, particularly on the buy side, to make sure that we are clean. Because I think it's quite easy, particularly when you're in a dynamic where you are the buyer, where you can easily accuse someone of doing something, right? So first and foremost, you need to get our fact base right. And if we're procurement professionals, we really should be focused on making decisions based on facts. So the personalities obviously come into it as well, and often that does make things a bit complex. So that's why I also encourage that the piece around people, behaviours, mindsets really need to be explored to really make sure that have you dot the I's and cross the T's, that on your side you're clean before you do anything. So that's my recommendation. The second one is if the accusation has merit. I guess my philosophy is always to be direct and also be timely, because a lot of these things are kind of, once you have established those facts, if you lose that particular window to be able to act, although sometimes it can be awkward to have these kind of conversations, particularly culturally, in Asia particularly, I think it will be a miss, and it will also mitigate the impact. So I will encourage providing that feedback but do it in a way that is fact-based and also in a way that is respectful, right? Respectful of the culture and kind of the context. I think as it was discussed around cross-cultural negotiations, you know, if you're dealing with perhaps like cultures like, you know, Australia, given that I'm Australian, I can probably talk a bit about that. Be quite straight up because they may not get the message. Whereas compared to kind of other cultures, I think you need to be just sensitive and respectful to that. And I think that would go a long way to kind of further that situation, whether that is a transactional deal or whether it is very much a relational, strategic kind of relationship. So.
Thank you. Thank you. So get your facts straight and then make sure you're solid at your end before you do anything toward that perceived deception to make sure that you got all the facts before moving forward. So now let's talk about in the negotiation if we are facing a very difficult one, the toughest negotiations. So we want to hear from the panelists what kind of tools or actions or special tips they are using to help themselves to prepare for a very difficult negotiation. So let's start from Kai-Ling.
Sure. So I recall we had a very tough negotiation, I think, 2 years ago with one of our IT vendor. So it was not during COVID or affected by COVID. It's just because I think at that time, the IT industry has gone through a lot of mergers, acquisitions. So we were faced with almost like escalating kind of renewal pricing. So I'm sure all of you do renewal, support renewal. Maybe you would just anticipate a inflationary adjustment of maybe worst case 10%. But we were very shocked that the vendor gave us a 3 times increase when we first negotiate. And when we asked them to revisit their numbers and check through, they withdrew the quote and they increased to 5 times what we originally paid for. And the more we tried to push, they increased further. Even when we asked them down for a face-to-face meeting, the meeting ends in 10 minutes. They said that I have nothing to offer you. This is what we have. You, DBS, you just take it. So it was the toughest negotiation I ever encountered. And I think it really put all my years of experience to test. And I think that speaks a lot about the procurement practitioners. We not only just run the bank, sometimes we also change the bank. And at times, we really need to act very fast, and we got no time to lose because we were 3 months before the contract is due to expire. And if we were delayed, the vendor can just pull the plug and they can either sue us for non-compliance or they can switch off the power at the data center. So we can't afford to waste any more time. And whether it's 8 p.m., 9 p.m., I just have to make the call to my CIO, my technology MD, say, hey, we are in a crisis now. I need your time at this night. And we really got into a call, we pulled in the right guys, and we named this project, Project SEAL, S-E-A-L, which is the US Navy code word. So it really matters to us a lot, and I think at that point, we didn't leverage on any tools. It's really on mapping out all the options and what are the negotiation leverage. Are they our corporate clients? Do we have reciprocal relationship? What are the other products that we have? What are they doing all this to us? And are other customers or other peers in the industry also facing that? So we did that landscape and profiling of the situation. And we also, I think what works for us in this case is all of us were cohesive between the IT and procurement. We all speak the same language. We all are very focused on either getting this vendor to meet or reduce the pricing, or we move them out, which is the next best alternative. There is no middle ground, because the middle ground would mean that we are actually setting a bad precedent and giving them a 10 times increase, which is ridiculous. Yeah, and nobody is willing to go through that to justify. And so therefore, we make one last attempt to negotiate. We even escalate to the headquarters of the vendor, but it doesn't work. And so we made decision within 3 days to say, okay, let's switch out to another vendor. And what works with this new vendor was they were very collaborative, such that, okay, we sign a MOU, they provision the guys, they do quick POC tests and make sure it works on small instances. And then in parallel, procurement work through the weekend to tidy up the contracts while they put in the right guys. We trade because they have their guys in the US. So we got no choice. Okay, fine, we will work round the sun. And therefore, that's how we made the whole project done within 3 months, and we exited from that particular IT vendor. And that sent a very strong message to the industry that we say what we mean and we do what we say. So it's not I think it's unhappy, but this is what we need to do, the right thing for the company. Yeah.
Bravo. Give her a round of applause. This is bravo. Amazing, isn't it? And then switching out a vendor and find a very competent replacement. This is really wonderful.
I think it's really everybody is on the same target and goal. That is very important. It's just like F1 team or even the best soccer team. Everybody plays a part and everybody must be going for the same target.
Yeah, I think it's this very important moment. Procurement really show your strength as a communicator, externally and internally, right? How are you going to build a team internally to support you? Like talking to IT, that takes some talent to speak to them so they sense the business sense and then the urgency. So Anga, I think you have some tough and difficult negotiation you can share with us too.
Yes, so we have experienced several tough and difficult negotiations before and during COVID. It was more of supply critical again. So generally these tough negotiations have extreme demands from the suppliers, and they give very small concessions according to me, and they use the commitment tactics, right? So one need to understand the problem well, explain it to the vendor properly. We need to listen and listen first and be assertive. I think most important point is in the tough negotiation, there are occasions where you get sometimes very personal with the supplier. So we need to separate the person from the problem and understand the problem or explain the problem. And we need to stick to the facts, not to give up. One example I would like to share is, we have done a collaboration with the supplier along with the government of our local government in the Gujarat state, where we were required to get the enough supply of oxygen for our critical manufacturing. So there was a time when in India, government has banned the use of oxygen for the industry or given certain limitations to the quantities. So we being the patient helping industry, we went beyond the supplier, and along with the supplier we went to the government and forward our case and got the larger share of the allocation of the quantities. So the point here I'm making is we need to explore all the options together. The options could be beyond our reach, and we need to reach out to those options and find out a deal that would benefit both supplier as well as us, and the ultimate end use for the patients on the medicines. And certain times, for example, we had a large requirement of purchase of our laptops and computers during the COVID because most of our employees started working from home. So here we were not getting the enough deliveries from the suppliers in terms of the orders that we placed. So what we did is we collaborated with multiple suppliers and consolidated our demand, and in fact, we gave a premium price for certain orders by linking it to the deliveries or delivery dates. So if the suppliers are delivering us on agreed date, they would get a reward of a certain percentage on the prices that we had agreed. So these are some of the tactics and tools that we use to handle the difficult negotiation. The main objective is to ease out the tensions so that you reduce the risk of breaking down such negotiation and increase the chances of getting a satisfying result. This is my experience.
Wonderful. So Angat was able to negotiate for the oxygen tank. You know, during the COVID period, this is very precious and very in scarcity. And then he was able to do that and then deliver the laptops to employees working from home. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and then that's something quite challenging too, especially for the vendors to commit to such deliveries. So these are all the wonderful experience sharing. And then so I want to now open to the floor if anyone have any questions. And then when you ask the question, please say you're addressing to which panelist to answer your question, please.
Open to everybody. What I suppose negotiation courses have you guys done and or would recommend from a, obviously there's a lot of them out there. There's going to be a spectrum of good and bad, but your experience of doing a good course?
Yeah, I can share. So when I joined DBS 9 years ago, we were sent to a negotiation training. I think what I love about that course is really real time. You need to spar with your colleagues. You need to spar with other procurement practitioners. So that is where you practice, because you can read all you want from the net, but nothing beats having the real time practicing with the other party who is equally a specialist in this area.
Yeah, I'll probably kind of add on to that, not necessarily as to who in terms of provider, but the piece around role playing and actually being able to play those different roles and encourage, particularly in capability building, right, with your teams. It just seems like it's always something that's a bit awkward, particularly when it's role playing. Like you get people who go, well, who's going to go first? Like, can you do this? I think there needs to be a bit of a breaking of the ice to encourage people to get out there and just do it. What may be useful is if they see an example. So, for example, we've put on a workshop where you get usually two people who they probably want to see negotiate, put them on the stage, get them to actually go through it, and then you encourage them to, well, let's now do it. I think that really helps to, just to kind of make sure that they can internalize it, because to Kelling's point, if you kind of go on a course, it doesn't really help you to make that into practice. So, yeah, otherwise I think there'll be a lot of good negotiators out there. So, and I also encourage you to have kids, continue to refine your skills by negotiating with your child. So I currently have a 6-year-old and he's obviously turning to be a very good negotiator, especially around wanting toys and, playing games. So, I think of it as an everyday, negotiation refresher.
Inga, what do you think in terms of
Yes, so
learning
definitely certain courses will help you sharpen your skills. But more than the courses, what is important in negotiation is practice, practice, and practice. I think you can reflect upon the negotiation deals that you have done. You can analyze what could have done better or the improvement areas. You can seek the feedback internally about the negotiation process that you have carried out, including the feedback from the suppliers. And also, as Valda rightly said, we are negotiating day in and out, right from our home to our office. To all our friends and colleagues and everyone. So some or the other atom that you are talking is negotiating. Even what we are discussing today is a negotiating, a way of or a form of negotiating. So course will definitely give you tips and tools or the case studies, but more than the course, I believe is practice is important and role plays and evaluation and reflection upon how you have carried out a negotiation.
Okay, so many thanks, Tracy and team. So there you have it. Negotiate with your kids. I think you'll have more chance with suppliers, to be fair. Okay, so now we know what the critical success factors are about negotiation. We're going to now learn